Hi, I'm Pete Fellows of Fellows Associates, an IP recruitment and social media company. I'm here on behalf of Careers in Ideas and IP Inclusive as part of the Summer in IP initiative. In conjunction with IP firm Hamzo, we are running a series of interviews with firms around the world to discuss opportunities outside the UK for graduates interested in IP. Today, I'm with Duat Lima, who is the Managing Director of Spruson and Ferguson in Asia. So, can you briefly describe your firm and your role within it?
Sure. So Spruson and Ferguson is an IP boutique firm. So this means we're exclusively focused on IP. And in particular, we have a patent practice and a trademark practice and a design practice. Well, sometimes you consider that together with trademarks or patent or the patent practice. So we do everything in the life cycle from the filing through the examination, prosecution, and then the grant. We do it, we're heavily skewed traditionally towards patents, our firm historically. And our structure is we cover the entire APAC region from Australia all the way up to China. So we have 10 offices, three in Australia, five offices in Southeast Asia, and one office in Beijing and one in Hong Kong. So my role is managing director. I oversee the Asia practice. Um, so I'm overseeing a team of around 300 people overall, both in trademarks and in patents. We have around 90 attorneys, and then also an extended team of paralegals, administrative support, and across the region.
And then which technical fields or industries do you work in the most? Is it skewed to one way or the other?
Sure. So that's a very good question, and I'll focus on patents. So we are organized into four technology groups. So we have a chemical group, a life sciences group, a mechanical group, and an electrical group. So we have a lot of not only breadth but depth in all groups. So the clients we work come from different technologies, and we have a large and experienced team across all technologies. Now, if you ask me historically, did we have any bias towards any of the groups? Historically, because of IP having, especially in Southeast Asia, is a recent industry in the grand
Yeah.
scheme of things. Um, it was traditionally very skewed towards a large pharma, big pharma. Those were the large farmers, the large corporates who were filing extensively across the region, and that were really at the onset of IP, and then sort of a couple of large engineering and technology companies as well. Now, over time, that initial skew has sort of rebalanced itself. And so today, looking at our firm internally, it's an even split between chemical, bio, electrical, and mechanical work. There's some differences in terms of, some countries are more skewed to certain technologies versus others, but overall within our coverage, it is very even these days, and that's reflecting the composition of the teams, which is also very even and very balanced across the different technologies.
What types of clients do you typically represent? I guess in terms of size, and then is the proportion that's associate networks, or it's a lot of it generated
Yeah.
locally?
So typically, the jurisdictions we operate in, with the exception of China these days, and things have changed a lot there over time, but we are what we call secondary jurisdictions. What that means is these are jurisdictions where most of the IP is still foreign IP that flows into these countries. Okay, so as you're aware, most of the IP in the world is generated, let's say, in the US, traditionally the US, in Europe, Japan, South Korea, and more recently China as well. Right? Those are sort of the big traditional markets. Now, when you look at countries like Singapore, where I'm based, the split of work is still 90% of the IP of all applications, and in particular patent applications filed in Singapore, are foreign applications, and only 10% are domestic. Now, let me break down, give you a bit of sense of our client base and how it is composed. Now that I've given you some a bit of a view on the context, so we mirror in many ways our structure. Our client base is a reflection of the context of the country. So for us as well, around 90% of the work is incoming and 10% is local. Maybe let me start by the local work. The local work, we work with all of the large filers, large domestic filers across Southeast Asia. S- To this day, these are still very concentrated in universities or in research agencies with government funding and government granting. And then also there are some startups that we also support locally, and a couple of corporates. But still, by and large, a lot of the IP being developed locally is still very driven by universities and research agencies. In Southeast Asia, and in Hong Kong is the same. Obviously, in China, that's by now very different. But the majority of the work in reality is foreign work, incoming work into these jurisdictions. And we have dealt historically. Our firm is 140 years old next year, so it's got a long history, and it's been a long history of working with the best clients in the world, and these include naturally the largest corporations in the world. Okay, so across any technology field. So I won't mention any names, but I will tell you that across the board, across different industries, we work with the largest filers from the US, Europe, and the UK, and also China. How do we work with them? With some of those who have a bit more tradition in IP. Let's take the classical example of pharma. No, these have very mature in-house teams. So with a lot of these clients, we will interact with them directly.
Yes.
For some others, we are receiving the work through our network of foreign law firms or foreign agents that we interact with. So we can do both. But in terms of the clients, the large filers, they're looking for, competence, timeliness, capacity, and coverage, right? And with our network of offices and the breadth and depth of our team and experience, this is something we're uniquely positioned to offer across the APAC region. And so you would expect it's if you see a large corporation that is active in Asia, there's a good chance they would be a client.
How is the patent profession structured in Singapore and Asia more generally?
Yeah, so listen, it really depends. When you look at Asia or even Southeast Asia, a lot of people look at it as a region. But in a way, it's a bit like Europe, where it's a region but composed of very different countries. So the rules and regulations, the structure of the profession is different from country to country. Let me start by some of the less mature jurisdictions. In some of them, there isn't really a qualification to become a patent attorney. Okay, so there's in some cases, and obviously Hong Kong is a case historically, but Philippines, for example, this is the case. In some other countries, there is a qualification that does not require a technical background. And then in Singapore, we traditionally, what you will see is there is a very stringent qualification process composed of 4 papers, much like it is in the UK. And to be able to sit the papers, you do need to come from an adequate appropriate technology background, and you will need to do a preparatory course. Okay, so a lot of the attorneys here, they will be, on the chemical life sciences, they will be scientists who then decide to take this qualification in patent law, and upon completing, become qualified patent attorneys. Okay. On the side of the mechanical and electrical is very similar, but these would be engineers that a lot of times would come from industry, or some of them would have been in the research context as well. That then decide decide for a career in patent law and specialize as such. So there is no requirement to go to law school like in some other countries. It's really a separate profession. Now, what is interesting is obviously a patent attorney is not a lawyer. They cannot represent a client in court. They can provide testimony and be very involved in the process, but litigation is completely detached uh, from the patent attorney profession here in Singapore.
And that's quite different to how things are developing in Europe because we're having more patent attorneys that
Of
are
course.
also litigating now.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But so in this region of the world, in APAC, this has been the model for ages. Actually, you should know that patent law in especially in Singapore is based out of UK common law. So you will see a lot of similarities, and obviously in Australia the same, although it has evolved over time. Uh, but yeah, there is still that clear distinction between a lawyer, a litigator, and what is a patent attorney. And for now, they are kept separately. Just to be clear, our firm, Spruson and Ferguson, we do have a litigation practice in Australia, but we do not have one in Asia.
What are the usual qualification routes for someone entering the profession in Singapore?
Yeah, so I will talk a bit about the formal qualification pathway in Singapore, and then I will also touch a bit at how we are approaching it in our firm at Spruce's. So the qualification route, and I touched a bit upon it, but there is a requirement to take a preparatory course that is delivered by one of the local universities, and that's sort of a foundational course. And once you complete the course, you will be eligible to sit the exams, assuming you come from an appropriate technology background and you fulfill all of the eligibility criteria. So the way the papers are established is in a way very similar and modeled after the UK. So there are four papers, A, B, C, and D, and paper D is the one that is really specific to Singapore. It's a law paper. The other papers are a mirror of the same papers that you have in the UK. Okay. Now, is there a requirement, a maximum number of attempts? I should say that qualification in Singapore passing rates are relatively low. So it is a demanding profession. And the result of that is that you only have around a couple hundred qualified attorneys in Singapore and around 100 active. So the talent pool is very limited, I would say. But those who qualify locally are obviously, excellent professionals being able to, haven't had to go through this very stringent process. Now, you can take as many exams and as many papers as you want in a year, or you can take as few as you want. So up to you. There is no limit in attempts. Usually each paper, the cost per paper does change over time. So as the number of attempts that you do increases, I think the cost will increase, but this would be around, let's say, £500. Don't quote me on this. I'm just trying to give you a sense of magnitude. Now, are there other ways to obtain this qualification? Yes, obviously, Singapore, having had the goal to become a substantive examination jurisdiction, has to recognize qualifications from other substantive examinations.
Mm.
So typically, what will happen is there will be an option if you let's say you come from the UK and you want to get qualified in Singapore as well, you are able to waiver three out of the four papers that you need to take. So I was mentioning paper D, the law paper in particular before, because this is the paper that you will need to take
Yes.
if you want to convert to, or if you want to become qualified in Singapore. Now, this is the case for the UK. I think it's very similar to Europe, to European and for US patent attorneys, and in some instances as well uh, for Australia. So this is the experience we've had, where there has been that where people have, from being qualified in other jurisdictions, have been able to sort of take a fast track approach to get qualified in Singapore, and this has been done successfully. And usually it's not uncommon. If you have an experienced attorney coming from the UK, they will usually become qualified in Singapore through this route. Okay. Now, let me tell you how we approach it in our firm. So we as in Spruson and Ferguson Asia, we obviously want to bring a very global, international um, identity because it is part of what the firm has been over the years. At the same time, we want to be very connected with the local ecosystem. What does this mean? It means that for us, it is indeed important to have attorneys who are qualified locally here in Singapore because this is our hub office here in Singapore. We want to be connected with the local ecosystem, and I feel that's part of that effort. At the same time, most of the clients we deal, what we usually call, the best clients in the world, these are American, Chinese, Japanese, European clients. And so we try to have a pool of attorneys that come from different backgrounds and different experiences in different jurisdictions. So what you will see is that we have, I think it's an unparalleled diversity in our senior attorney base. As yes, we have attorneys qualified in Singapore, but we have also in our office in Singapore attorneys qualified in Australia, in China, Japanese, European, UK, US. So we try to have this pool of diversity in the office because we do believe, it adds to the environment, to the experience that we can pass on to our trainees, but also adds to the quality of the service that we ultimately deliver to our clients. And don't forget, it's not only that work that comes through the doors from abroad. A lot of times will come from these countries. So having the expertise of the different rules and regulations in these countries is useful. It's also that a lot of the times when we're doing drafting for some of our local clients, these applications will subsequently be filed, in China, in the US, in Europe, in Japan. And so having an awareness and having this pool of talent that's able to bring the different perspectives is very useful for us. What does this mean in terms of recruitment? It means that while on one hand we are, open to having, and we want to have local talent and talent qualified in Singapore, we are also open and we also see the value in having foreign talent that has, a different experience and different qualifications join our team here in Singapore. Okay, so it's duality, very plugged into the local ecosystem, but bringing that first class service with a diverse international perspective.
How do you typically recruit new trainees or junior attorneys? So people like kind of very early career, maybe entering the profession for the first time.
So it's a very good question. As I said, the talent pool here in Singapore is limited. So we do it in a couple of ways. Uh, some of them will, somehow stumble across the profession, like many have over the years, and they will express their interest. Okay, so this can happen, but also we do have quite a bit of awareness that we try and do with seminars, connection with universities, just bring awareness to the profession to get people interested. And in some ways, and this is especially true on the chemical life science, you have people who are on the other side in the research that become interested as they start working with patent attorneys, right? So it could be one of these more individual approaches, but it could also be that we just post ads and reach out directly and we assess different profiles. We obviously have had a long history of developing talent in the firm that we wish to continue. We believe we offer the best learning platform in terms of diversity of work and exposure to different technologies and clients. And we actually have, junior and experienced attorneys who have expressed their desire to join our team because of the quality of the work that we have and because of the platform that we're able to offer. So, you need to be flexible. You do a bit of everything, but just making sure you are out there, connecting with universities, being active in the market, and then obviously leveraging these situations where there's someone interested in the profession, they want to know more, and they're willing to start. That's obviously something we also look at. Yeah.
How competitive is the entry level trainee market? Do you get a lot of applicants for each role?
Quantity of applications usually is not an issue in of itself. It is that, how many fulfill, the eligibility criteria, right? I think that's the problem. And so what we tend to see is actually diverging in different technology fields. So in life sciences and chemical, there are good profiles that come very often. People with the right experience, people who've obviously working in these research environments, who've had contact with the profession, and so don't forget when I mentioned about domestic clients, I talked a lot about local research agencies, local universities. A lot of this work is chemical life sciences, scientists more so than computer science, or because these are usually where the PhDs come from. And we usually have a preference for PhDs on the chemical life sciences, to be very open. Doesn't mean we take masters and bachelors, but more often than not, we do like the PhD profiles. Now, on that side, we do have some good applications. So it's not a it's relative. You've got a relatively good pool of applicants, uh, different levels of experience, but usually there is a good pool of applicants. I think on the mechanical and electrical is a bit more challenging. If I take the extreme example, which is ICT in the electrical field, I mean, a lot of electrical engineers and computer science engineers, especially in Singapore, this is where a lot of big tech is based in Asia. So the competition, the professional options, some of these individuals have are well paid and provide uh, very appealing careers. And so obviously, you tend to see fewer people interested in pursuing patent law. Um, so I would say, depending on the specific technology, you would see less profiles. It is rare to find a computer scientist or an engineer, increasingly rare, who outright thinks about a career in patent law. I mean, they're probably thinking about Meta or Google first before they think about patent law. But we try and work on what we can provide, which is a stable and rewarding career, being in contact with a diverse array of technologies in a supportive environment. And so, there's pros and cons, but we certainly try to articulate the advantages of a career in patent law.
And then when you're recruiting, do you recruit on a kind of a regular cycle that periods through the year, or do you recruit as kind of business needs arise at this level?
On the more on the more experienced attorneys, it's on a needs basis. Although I should say we're always open to receive good profiles and to find opportunities for those. So there's never a closed door. On the more junior attorneys, I wouldn't say we have a fixed yearly batch of people that come through, but we tend to recruit uh, a few every year. Yeah, there's obviously also a bit more, as you would expect, a bit more turnover at the junior levels, as some of them are trying this career for the first time. For some it works very well, for some others not so well. For some others, the career works well, but they see themselves more in-house roles rather than working in a firm context. So there's a bit of turnover there, which is understandable and healthy in many ways. So we're always open for good profiles, but we tend to hire a few every year at the more junior level.
Following on from that, in terms of UK science or engineering graduates, or people entering the profession for the first time, um, would you consider candidates who are moving to Singapore or interested in moving to Singapore at that kind of level?
So so we have had candidates with very limited experience joining. I would say, as a rule, we would prefer that people have a bit of experience, because moving halfway through the world to try out a completely new profession, maybe a bit too risky for the candidates.
Yes.
For us, it's actually okay, the risk. I'm thinking more about the candidate in they're moving their lives, and then this is not what they wanted, and it's a new profession, it's a new culture in Asia. I mean, ideally, we take candidates at different levels of experience. Ideally, if you're making such a move for for such a long distance, I mean, we'd want you to have a good sense of what the profession is like, what the type of work is. But as I said, we're always open to talk. And there's firms who are open to taking people from uh, this without experience and just coach them and bring batches every year. It's a bit of a different model because we don't do the full batches every year. And we try to make sure we have the right profiles coming. So I'm very open for people to be interested. I'm even happy to have a chat with people without experience, but usually, as a rule, we'd want people with a little bit of that had a little bit of the taste of what patent law looks like.
But I guess just thinking on that, if you had, because the UK profession at times for graduates, depending on intake into the firms, can be hugely competitive. And you do
Yeah,
find some people who have really strong academics, but then have to move into a paralegal role because there aren't any trainee positions available at the time. So I
yeah,
guess someone like that who's had two or so years as a paralegal, so understands a bit about the profession, but there's still aspirant to being a patent attorney might be a reasonable profile.
yeah. That's something we can consider. Yeah, that's someone we could consider. Yeah,
Um,
we don't have a lot of those here.
mm,
In this way, uh, but obviously, I think because we operate in a secondary jurisdiction, the structure organization of the firms is slightly different. But yeah, of course, we this is what we probably here call a patent executive, which is you're not yet training, but you're already doing some of the work, the more operational work, getting used to the processes, the formalities, and all of these things. Yeah, sure.
what concerns do you have when considering candidates from overseas, so foreign qualified attorneys or more junior candidates early career?
So there's a couple of things that I think people need to be aware. So one is that it is the same profession, the same type of firm, but the type of work can be different. Okay.
Mm.
So what I mean by this, I mentioned to you that 90% of the work we do is incoming work. That's a lot of agency work, prosecution work, and 10% is domestic work. So there's a little bit of drafting and draft opposite action response, but the majority is really incoming work. And this ratio can be reversed. I mean, especially if you're in the US, you're going to be looking at 90% domestic and 10% foreign work. What this means is, in terms of you spending a lot of time on one application, one case, you need to spend an adequate amount of time in multiple cases. Okay. So instead of deeply handling one case, you need to have a very professional and insightful light touch on a lot of cases, if you see what I mean. So the nature of the work will be a bit different. We still have a lot of drafting work, but it does depend on different technology areas, different clients, but usually that will be a difference between the work. The other difference is obviously in the UK, you are filing and prosecuting cases in one country. We have a hub model here in which you are filing and prosecuting the same case in multiple countries. Could be five, six, how many countries the client wants. And we do have our own offices in Southeast Asia. So you do need to get a certain level of knowledge. We do have local teams on the ground to support, but the attorney itself needs to be familiar with rules and regulations across multiple jurisdictions. Okay. Singapore is actually the easiest because it's very similar to the UK. So everything will be very familiar. So it'll be fast and quick to adjust. Some of the other jurisdictions have their own intricacies that the attorney needs to get adjusted to. But the big difference is that usually you're filing and prosecuting in one country, you're not going to be filing and prosecuting in multiple countries at the same time. And probably the last one is there's a I've been in Asia now for close to 10 years. There is a cultural aspect. Asia is not all the same. Japan is different from China, is different from Hong Kong, that's different from Southeast Asia. But there's differences in the culture and the way of work from Europe. Okay, so Singapore is a very international place, and as I mentioned, we try to have an international team where we have all of these different perspectives. But it's still going to be different from having your firm in London or Cambridge. That's mostly British. So there's an adjustment to the work culture and the culture in general of the society, right? Singapore is a very easy place to live and a fantastic place to live. So there hasn't been a lot of issues in that regard. But I always want to keep that top of mind and make sure people understand it's not the same thing to move from England to France as it is to move from England to Singapore. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we've talked about kind of the qualification process, but how does Spruson support people through training in terms of lectures, peer support,
Yeah.
etc.?
Yeah. I think so. Obviously, one of the bad things about uh, the qualification being so stringent in Singapore is, passing rates are not very high. So usually takes people a little bit of time to qualify. On the flip side, the good thing is that we have a large cohort of people that are simultaneously going for qualification. Okay. So there is a support network in the group. We all know when it's time for the qualifying papers. There's a preparation routine. We provide support in multiple ways. So we do have some lectures that are being delivered by some of our attorneys, um, on the different papers. There's Q&As and things like this. We obviously, provide adequate support in terms of exam leaves and annual leaves around those dates, so people can try to prepare themselves as best as possible. And we also try to take as much as possible the load off in terms of work when it's getting close to exam time. Now, we are now looking into, and we started doing some external training to support specific cases, because sometimes you may have people who are stuck on one paper and they've blocked on that paper. So we try on a case by case basis to provide support as appropriate in those cases. I would say, although even though we have this structure of support, that the best training that you get to become qualified is in Sprucen. And it's not because of this support network and this structure that we have, which is quite useful. It is really because of the nature of the work that we handle. The nature of the work that we handle will give you, and the quality of the attorneys you're going to be working with, give you all of the experience and exposure so that you are able to increase the chances to become qualified. And that's the reality. A big part of the qualification is learning on the job. And you will learn by, taking the difficult drafts, doing the difficult office action responses. That's how you learn. You learn by the variety and depth of the work that you need to deal with on a daily basis. That's the best exam prep, which is then complemented by all of these structures. But what I mean is, if you're not working and studying from home to get qualified, it's just not going to work in the context of it may work in other jurisdictions, but here in Singapore, it just won't work. Uh, And a lot of the senior attorneys in my firm and in other firms, they are examiners for the papers. So, they do know what we want to achieve in the papers, what the questions are about, how to best tackle them. So you also have that insight, which is you know not replicable everywhere.
And then how long does qualification typically take? I mean, maybe if we think in terms of what would be a best case scenario, and then what is the kind of the average scenario for
Okay.
time?
Yeah. So it's a good question. The answer varies widely. I think in the history of Singapore, the fastest someone is qualified in was 1 year, where they passed all four exams. I believe that has happened 1 year. I've had an attorney last year who took all four papers and passed three. So she's now taken this year the remaining paper. Let's see. So, but I won't sugarcoat it. If you're doing the full process through Singapore, you're not qualified elsewhere. You need to take the prep course. So that was going to take you 18 months. Once you get that prep course, you take, let's say, 6 month gap, and then you start the qualification, then you wait a year. And then to pass the exams, I mean, I think from start to finish, from the time you start training on, from the time you start the exam, from the time you start taking the exams, maybe it's going to be 5, 6 years,
Mhm.
realistically. From the time you train, you start training, if you need to go through the course, could be 7, 8 years. Again, we have people qualifying 3, 4 years. Those would be good cases. With people who've taken 8, 10 years, those would be other cases. Yeah, and so it depends a bit. It depends a bit. I would say if you're just taking paper D, just
Mm.
the waiver, actually there's a very good chance you will qualify at your first attempt. Usually the papers that the attorneys struggle with are not the law paper. That's usually the one that's in the grand scheme of things, more accessible.
In terms of moving to Singapore or to other regions within Asia, what are the kind of work permit and visa issues? Is it a particular barrier, or is it reasonably straightforward for people to
Yeah,
move
for
across?
Singapore, yeah, Singapore is relatively straightforward. There's an employment pass. The firm would take care of the application, and this usually takes 1 month to come out. So no, it's a very simple process. In other countries, it can be a bit more complex or take a bit longer. Um, but in Singapore, I would say is actually very straightforward. If time is of the urgence, we've had people that we've employed in Singapore, and then later on they wanted to move to one of the other offices, which usually is not the case, but there have been a few exceptions, and we've accommodated those. As I said, we have um, 5 offices here in Southeast Asia, and technically you can be employed in any of those. So if there is a specific preference other than Singapore, I don't know, because you have a partner in a certain country, whatever the reason is, uh, as long as there is an adequate training and you're settled into the firm, we are very happy to welcome you to any of our offices.
And does it make a difference how early career someone is in terms of getting a visa?
So in Singapore, obviously the visa is related to your perceived contribution to society and the needs of the same society. And one of the criteria is obviously your salary. So for very senior roles in Singapore, the process is more straightforward in some ways. But usually, as an attorney, regardless of the level, it should not be overly complex. We just had um, an associate come from the UK, and we got his visa approved in 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. So yeah, we just had someone else coming in from Japan. He's from Indonesia originally, and his visa took also 10 days. And this is a junior, not a qualified attorney. So we obviously our team has a lot of experience dealing with it. The Ministry of Manpower here in Singapore is very efficient, so I would not anticipate that would be a hurdle that cannot be overcome.
What would you recommend UK students or attorneys do to improve their chances of being hired in Singapore?
I am really not sure if there is a struggle.
Mm.
I mean, to me, UK attorneys have a big advantage to come to Singapore, which is Singapore law is based on UK common law. So it can't get much easier than this. So the adjustment, there is a cultural adjustment, but the basis of the law, the basis of the profession is actually the same. So I think the difficulty is not really in coming, it's really in expressing interest and realizing Singapore is an option. You want to be a patent attorney, you're thinking if you're in the UK and, let's say you want to leave for whatever reason it is. I mean, you can think about what do you think? You think, oh, I could go to the US, I could go to Europe, I could go to Australia. Yeah, we've had loads of attorneys in Australia. I'm not sure everyone knows, and I took this for granted, but English is the first language in Singapore.
Mm.
There's no I just wanted to make that clear to everyone who's watching this. English is the first language in Singapore. Everyone speaks English as their first language. Uh, all of the patent applications are filed in English. Okay. So you have the language, you have the same basis in terms of the law, the framework. It is really not a very difficult transition. There's a large British community here in Singapore. Singapore is a very international place, but historically, there's a large British community. There's, English football leagues still playing on the weekends and things like this. So the community is large and spread across multiple industries. And so I think it's really more a matter of, have you thought about Singapore? Have you put it on the map? Singapore or Southeast Asia in general. I think it's more that than otherwise, because I know a lot of people put Australia on their map,
Yeah.
and Australia is further away from Singapore. I mean, I know it looks we at least I'm originally from Portugal, but my friends and family when I first moved would say, "Oh, it's so convenient now. You can go to Australia so easily." And I said, "Well, it's 8 hours between Singapore and Sydney. It's the same as popping from London to New York. So it's it's not really that close, right?"
Mm.
So Singapore is close, extremely well connected, booming economy. UK profiles have a huge advantage because of the history, because of the language, because of the way the law is based on here. So it's really more if you thought about it rather than how can you increase your chance. And as I was saying, the pool here of talent is limited.
Mm.
The qualification is very limited. So I think it's a great opportunity as long as you put it on the radar.
Are there any common mistakes foreign candidates make when applying?
I would say I wouldn't say the mistake is when applying, but I would say that, you know, patent attorneys are scientists or engineers. So by nature, they tend to be very structured people
Mm.
and they're very focused you know, uh, they're very detail oriented usually. They're very focused on their work, the technology. And what I feel sometimes is they have an idea in mind of what they want and they're not really very open to explore anything outside that comfort zone. So my rather than a mistake or any common mistake, I would just say, be open, be adventurous. Life is not black or white. Some people have come here, have stayed their life. Some people have come, they learned, they stayed a few years, then went back, and it made them better people, better professionals. So I'd say more keep an open mind and take a challenge. I think more than anything else. This is something I see. I mean, in Asia, obviously Singapore is very popular, so everyone wants to come,
Mm.
and so usually people are already open arms to Singapore. But I think with profiles from the UK or the West in general that don't know the circumstances of Singapore so well, I think just be open and explore, be curious, ask ask questions, and yeah, I think that's pretty much what I would say. I don't see a common mistake that is repeated over and over again.
That seems a great place to leave it. So, thank you for joining me today, Duart, and thanks to Spruson and Ferguson for supporting this initiative.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure, Pete. Thank you.